Late 1874, in the heart of Nebraska's rolling plains, the air already carried the crisp bite of impending winter. The sun dipped early behind the horizon, leaving long shadows that crept across the prairie like silent specters. The wind whistled through the skeletal remains of corn stalks that had stubbornly clung to life throughout a summer that had been far too dry and mercilessly hot. Anna Bjornson stood at the edge of her modest homestead, surveying the desolate expanse before her. 12 children, ranging in age from the tiny babe she still carried in her arms to a boy nearing adolescence, clustered behind her, their faces pale from worry and hunger. Each child was bundled in layers of patched clothing, hand-me-downs from neighbors or older siblings, thick mittens, and wool caps that had been knit and re-knit until they were threadbare in places. Yet they had been faithfully mended by Anna's careful hands. She felt the familiar ache in her bones, the exhaustion that came from running a household on the edge of survival. Yet there was no time for despair. There could not be. The stakes were far too high. The crops had failed again, as they had the year before, and even the year prior to that had offered only the barest sustenance. Cornfields were shriveled, their kernels sparse and cracked. Potatoes had rotted in the unseasonably dry soil. A few stalks of cabbage had survived, but they were small and bitter to the taste. The rest of the neighbors had fared little better, their pantries half empty, and their livestock lean from inadequate feed. Settlers whispered to one another in the evenings, trading stories of families that had gone hungry or lost children to sickness brought on by malnutrition and frostbite. Yet while others despaired or argued over whose fault the drought was, Anna remained quietly calculating, planning, organizing, and preparing. She had learned long ago that panic could be as dangerous as famine, that despair was a thief that stole energy, courage, and ingenuity. She turned her gaze toward the root cellar beneath the cabin, a small, dug-out space lined with logs and packed earth, accessible by a trapdoor in the floor of the main room. It was there she had begun the work of preserving whatever she could find, long before the first frost had even threatened the horizon. She had filled it with whatever vegetables had survived the fields, carefully inspecting each potato, carrot, and turnip before storing it. Any signs of rot or insect damage were immediately set aside to be boiled or fermented into broths and sauces. Straw and sawdust were layered meticulously between the roots to regulate moisture and temperature, creating microclimates that would allow the food to last far longer than any ordinary storage method might permit. Anna moved slowly but deliberately, her hands coated in the earthy residue of soil, the smell of it mingling with the faint aroma of smoked meat from the hearth above. Her mind was a whirl of calculations, how much each child could consume, how long the stores would last, and how to supplement what they had with whatever the prairie might provide. She remembered her mother as teachings from Norway, lessons passed down in hushed tones while the northern winds rattled the shutters and the smell of peat smoke filled the air. Preservation was an art, a combination of science, instinct, and experience. She had spent hours testing different layering techniques, experimenting with ashes to prevent rot, and observing how temperature fluctuations affected the longevity of stored food. She had already begun to see results, small but vital victories. A potato that would have gone bad in a few days now lasted weeks. Carrots retained their firmness longer. Cabbage leaves remained edible far past their usual shelf life. Beyond the root cellar, the cabin itself had been carefully arranged to maximize warmth and efficiency. Each child had a small bed, crafted from simple wooden frames and stuffed with straw, set close enough to the hearth that they would benefit from its heat, but far enough to avoid burns. Anna had reinforced the windows with extra layers of oiled cloth to reduce drafts and insulate against the piercing winter winds. The walls, thin logs hewn from the surrounding timber, were protected where possible with straw bales and mud patches, an improvised form of insulation she had perfected over several years. Each evening, as the sun sank behind the horizon, she would stoke the fire to just the right temperature, enough to keep the cabin warm through the night, but not so hot as to waste precious firewood, which she rationed carefully. Her neighbors often scoffed at her methods. They piled wood high in their stoves, believing that heat alone could overcome the winter, while their root cellars sat half empty and rotting. They stocked up on dried meat and salted provisions, ignoring the subtle decay that could occur even in the harshest conditions. Anna, in contrast, was quietly systematic, converting scraps into usable food, boiling vegetable peelings into nutrient-rich broths, and repurposing spoiled or excess produce in ways that amazed no one, but ultimately kept her family alive. She had a mental inventory of everything she possessed, from the last jar of pickled beans to the handful of dried herbs collected from the prairie, and she calculated the optimal usage for each item down to the smallest fraction. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying with it a fine mist of snow that clung to her boots and clothing. Anna pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders, shielding the children who clung to her skirts and hands, chattering nervously about the cold. She spoke softly, offering reassurance without promising impossible outcomes. "We have food, my dears," she said, her voice calm but firm. "It may not be plenty, but it will carry us through. We must be careful, work together, and be patient. The prairie gives if we know how to take." Her children nodded, trusting her implicitly, though some of the older ones had begun to whisper among themselves about how other families seemed to have more. Anna smiled, knowing that in time they would understand that abundance was not merely a matter of quantity, but of foresight, planning, and careful stewardship. The coming weeks would test every skill she possessed. The first snowfall dusted the fields, glinting in the weak sunlight like powdered sugar, deceptively beautiful and utterly unforgiving. The children would tire from helping fetch firewood, tend to the small animals that survived the drought, and assist in daily tasks that were more demanding than play or study. Anna herself moved tirelessly from chore to chore, tending the small herd of chickens, checking traps for small game, maintaining the fire, inspecting stored food for early signs of spoilage, and constantly recalculating rations. Every decision mattered and every lapse could be catastrophic. Yet in the midst of this relentless labor, she found a strange kind of peace, the knowledge that she could and would meet the challenge head-on. Her ingenuity extended even to minor details. She had constructed a system of shelves above the hearth, where herbs, small vegetables, and dried meats could be hung, using the rising heat to slow spoilage without cooking the items outright. Small scraps of fat from the butchered chickens were saved and melted into blocks to create a makeshift cooking fat, which could be used sparingly to enrich broths and soups. Water, always a precious commodity, was collected from a nearby well and stored in clay jars, covered with cloth to prevent freezing. She taught her children to take only what they needed and to leave no mess behind, instilling discipline and mindfulness at every turn. While the other settlers talked and debated who would make it through the winter, Anna was already 3 steps ahead, mentally running through scenarios. What if the snow drifts too high to reach the well? What if a sickness strikes one child? What if the fire dwindles and the wood pile runs low? In each scenario, she had a plan, often relying on unconventional methods that no one else would dare attempt. To the untrained eye, her efforts might seem obsessive, even excessive, but to Anna, they were the difference between life and death. Even the children understood the seriousness of the times, and though fear lingered at the edges of their hearts, it was tempered by their mother's calm and resolute presence. They learned to move quietly through the cabin during the night, fetching water or tending the fire as needed, guided by the silent understanding that every action had consequences. Anna often reflected on the lessons she hoped to impart: resourcefulness, patience, courage, and respect for the land. The prairie could be harsh, but it was not cruel to those who approached it with care and intelligence. By mid-November, the first deep freeze settled in, locking the soil and hardening the remnants of the cornfield into brittle stalks. The wind howled through the gaps in the logs, rattling the cabin and testing every seal Anna had reinforced. Yet inside, the root cellar maintained its promise. Potatoes remained firm, turnips and carrots were edible, and the small stash of dried beans and grains provided a crucial supplement. Anna boiled a pot of broth made from vegetable trimmings and a few scraps of meat, serving it to her children in small bowls. The aroma filled the cabin, warm and comforting, and for a moment, the fear of the harsh winter receded. Anna knew this was only the beginning. The weeks ahead would be longer, colder, and more demanding. But she also knew that she had laid the groundwork for survival. Her meticulous preparation, innovative preservation methods, and the lessons she had instilled in her children were the tools they needed to endure. The other settlers might have had more food in the short term, but Anna had something far more enduring: a strategy, a system, and a family prepared to face winter, as worst with courage and ingenuity. As the night deepened, she tucked her youngest children into their straw-filled beds, checked the fire one last time, and glanced toward the darkened fields beyond. The wind moaned over the prairie, and the stars shimmered coldly above, indifferent to the struggles below. Yet within the walls of that small cabin, 12 children lay worn and fed, and Anna allowed herself a rare moment of quiet satisfaction. She knew that come morning the labor would resume, but so too would hope. For in her hands and in the hands of her children, survival was not a matter of luck, it was a matter of skill, planning, and unwavering resolve. And in a world where winter threatened to claim everything, Anna Bjornson had, against all odds, created a sanctuary of life in the heart of the prairie. The early chill of November had settled over the prairie, and the frost painted delicate patterns on the cabin windows like fragile lace, shimmering in the weak morning light. Anna Bjornson rose before dawn, her body aching from days spent preparing for the brutal winter ahead. She had already surveyed the fields, inspecting what little the drought-stricken earth had yielded, and she turned her attention inward, to the small root cellar beneath her cabin, a place that had become the heart of her strategy to feed 12 hungry children through months of scarcity. The door creaked as she opened it, revealing rows of vegetables meticulously arranged in straw and sawdust, each carefully spaced to allow airflow, while minimizing the risk of rot. She ran her fingers along the smooth skin of a potato, noting the firmness, the absence of blemish, the way it had survived the dry summer's heat. Her hands were skilled from years of labor, yet each day she felt a renewed respect for the fragility of life on the frontier. One misstep, an overlooked blemish, a gap in the straw, a container left unsealed, could lead to decay that might mean starvation for one child or more. She moved deliberately, carefully adjusting layers of straw, turning vegetables that had been stored days before to ensure none were settling in damp pockets. She noted the subtle differences. One carrot seemed slightly softer than the others, perhaps a sign of early spoilage, and she separated it immediately to be boiled into a nutrient-rich broth later that day. Her knowledge of preservation was not theoretical, it was learned through trial, observation, and necessity. Anna had experimented extensively with different methods of prolonging the life of her stores. Straw provided insulation, sawdust absorbed moisture, and ash prevented the growth of mold. She had learned which vegetables could be stored together and which required separation. She had built small compartments within the root cellar, hidden pockets and boxes that allowed her to rotate food, using the oldest supplies first, while keeping the freshest tucked safely away. It was a system that required constant attention, and she moved through it like a conductor orchestrating a complex symphony, each movement purposeful, each observation recorded in her mind. Above ground, the cabin was quiet except for the occasional creak of timber as the wind swept across the prairie. Anna had arranged her household to maximize efficiency. Her children slept in beds strategically placed around the hearth, ensuring warmth without risking contact with the fire. Windows were covered with layers of oiled cloth to reduce drafts, and gaps in the log walls were filled with moss and mud. Every element of the cabin was intentional, designed to conserve heat, protect against the elements, and ensure the longevity of the food stored below. In addition to preserving vegetables, Anna had become adept at transforming scraps into sustenance. Potato peelings, wilted leaves, and bones that would have been discarded by other settlers were boiled into rich broths. The smell of simmering vegetables filled the cabin, offering a sense of comfort and reassurance. Her children learned to recognize the value of every bit of food, understanding that nothing in their small home went to waste. Even spoiled or damaged items were repurposed, fermented, boiled, or dried into forms that could provide nutrients without the risk of illness. The root cellar, however, was only one part of her strategy. Anna relied heavily on ingenuity and experimentation, constantly testing new methods for preserving food. She had built makeshift shelves above the hearth, allowing herbs, small vegetables, and dried meats to hang in the warm air, slowing spoilage without cooking the items. Small scraps of fat from butchered animals were melted into blocks, providing a precious source of cooking fat that could be used sparingly. She collected water from a nearby well, storing it in clay jars covered with cloth to prevent freezing. Every task, every innovation, was aimed at prolonging the life of her resources, ensuring that her family would not succumb to the harsh winter. Her approach was methodical. Each day began with an inspection of the root cellar, a careful check of every stored item, noting any signs of deterioration. She recorded mental notes of temperature fluctuations, moisture levels, and subtle changes in the vegetables' appearance. She rotated items frequently, ensuring the older stock was used first, while newer stock remained protected. Even minor changes in the arrangement could affect longevity, and Anna treated each decision with the seriousness it deserved. Outside, the prairie offered additional resources, though they were scarce and required ingenuity to harvest. Anna taught her children to forage for wild roots, berries, and nuts, which provided essential vitamins and supplements to the meager stores from the fields. They learned to recognize edible plants, to harvest without damaging future growth, and to clean and store what they collected. Traps were set for rabbits and squirrels, and even the harshest blizzards could not deter her from checking them. Each animal caught added protein and variety to their diet, a small but crucial part of sustaining 12 mouths through a long winter. Anna's knowledge extended to fermentation, a skill she had learned from her mother. She fermented cabbage and herbs, creating vital sources of nutrients to prevent scurvy, a constant threat during months when fresh vegetables were scarce. She experimented with different techniques, observing how temperature, moisture, and timing affected the outcome. Each success gave her confidence, each failure a lesson to be refined. She documented everything mentally, building a system that would allow her to feed her children, not just for one winter but for multiple seasons of scarcity. Evenings in the cabin were filled with quiet, purposeful activity. The children helped where they could, fetching firewood, cleaning vegetables, stirring broths, and tending to younger siblings. Anna guided them patiently, teaching skills they would need to survive in the future. Each child had a role, each task designed to contribute to the household survival. Through this work, they learned responsibility, patience, and resourcefulness. Anna understood that survival was not merely about storing food, but about cultivating skills, discipline, and ingenuity. Neighbors often mocked her methods. They saw the careful preservation of vegetables, the seemingly obsessive rotation of stalks, the hidden compartments, and the hanging herbs, and they called it excessive. Some whispered that she was wasting time that could be spent on more conventional preparations, such as chopping more firewood or purchasing salted meat. But Anna knew that their approach was short-sighted. They were reacting to immediate needs, while she was preparing for the long term, for the survival of 12 children across winters that might be harsher than any in living memory. Her foresight extended beyond food. She anticipated illness, frostbite, and accidents. She kept small bundles of herbs for medicinal purposes, maintained extra blankets and clothing, and devised systems for heating water and sterilizing containers. She planned for emergencies, considering every possible scenario that might threaten her family as survival. Her attention to detail was exhausting, yet it provided the security and stability her children needed. Anna also understood the psychological aspects of survival. She spoke calmly to her children, offering reassurance without false promises. She told stories of resilience, of ancestors who had endured harsh winters, of the ways in which ingenuity and perseverance could overcome adversity. She encouraged small celebrations for achievements, such as successfully preserving a batch of vegetables or catching an animal in a trap, reinforcing the value of effort and cooperation. Through these lessons, her children learned to take pride in their contributions and to approach challenges with determination rather than fear. As the winter deepened, Anna's methods were put to the test. Snowstorms blocked paths to the well, and blizzards swept across the prairie, burying the fields and isolating the cabin. Yet inside, the root cellar remained stable, the preserved vegetables and herbs providing sustenance, while broths made from scraps offered warmth and nutrition. Her innovations, straw layers, ash barriers, hanging shelves, hidden compartments worked as intended, proving the value of careful observation and experimentation. Anna's work was relentless. Each day required attention to multiple tasks, each with consequences for the family's survival. She prepared meals, tended to the children, maintained the fire, monitored the root cellar, checked traps, collected water, and foraged for additional resources. Her body ached constantly, yet she persevered, driven by necessity, by love for her children, and by the knowledge that her efforts were the difference between life and death. In moments of quiet, Anna reflected on the lessons she hoped to pass on. Survival required more than strength. It required intelligence, foresight, patience, and adaptability. It required understanding the land, observing subtle changes, and responding creatively to challenges. Her children were learning these lessons through example, through daily tasks, and through the careful cultivation of skills that would serve them for the rest of their lives. By the end of the day, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the wind howled across the prairie, Anna felt a sense of quiet satisfaction. The root cellar had been inspected, the fire stoked, the children fed and settled, and the lessons of the day had been imparted. The winter ahead remained uncertain, harsh, and unforgiving, but Anna knew that she had laid the foundation for survival. The combination of careful preservation, inventive reuse of scraps, strategic rationing, and the cultivation of skills in her children created a system capable of sustaining them through even the harshest months. In the stillness of the night, Anna allowed herself a brief moment of reflection. Outside, the prairie was indifferent, vast, and relentless, yet within the walls of her cabin, 12 children lay warm, fed, and safe. She had transformed a modest home into a bastion of life, using ingenuity, discipline, and observation to create a system that defied the odds. Tomorrow would bring more labor, more challenges, but Anna was prepared. She had the knowledge, the skills, and the determination to see her family through the long winter. And in that knowledge, she found a quiet triumph, the assurance that survival was not left to chance, but to careful planning, creativity, and unyielding perseverance. The harsh wind of early December tore across the Nebraska plains, bending the dry stalks of grass low and rattling the cabin logs with a mournful groan. Snow had begun to accumulate, not in thick drifts yet, but enough to leave the prairie pale and stark, a harsh reminder that winter would not be forgiving. Anna Bjornson rose before dawn as she always did and carefully peered through the oiled cloth covering the cabin windows. The gray light revealed the familiar expanse of their homestead, a patchwork of snow, frost, and the few stubborn remnants of their failing crops. Her children were still asleep, huddled beneath layers of straw and wool in their small beds, their breaths rising in soft clouds that fogged the air near their faces. She paused, taking a moment to steady herself before the day. As labor began, this winter she knew would require more than preserved vegetables and careful rationing. The land itself, stripped by drought and frost, would need to be coaxed for every morsel of sustenance it could provide, and it would be up to her and her children to harvest it. Anna's hands were already raw from work, but she felt the familiar surge of resolve. She moved quietly across the cabin, checking the fire, tending to a small kettle of water, heating on the hearth, and then inspecting the root cellar. The vegetables were still firm, the layers of straw and sawdust keeping the potatoes, carrots, and turnips in surprisingly good condition. Even the cabbages, which had been the most delicate, held their leaves without wilting entirely. Anna carefully adjusted a few vegetables, separating those that seemed to be softening and adding extra straw to their layer. Every movement was deliberate, as she had learned that even small miscalculations could lead to spoilage. Once satisfied, she returned to the hearth and began waking the children, her voice calm but firm. "Rise, my dears," she said softly. "Today, we go into the prairie. We have work to do, and every moment counts." The older children rubbed sleep from their eyes, while the youngest ones clung to Anna's skirts. They were wary, as the snow and wind made the prairie a strange and intimidating place, but they trusted their mother implicitly. She dressed them in extra layers, wrapping their arms and legs in wool and straw, tying scarves over their mouths and noses to keep the frostbite at bay. Each child carried a small satchel, not for toys, but for the collection of whatever food they could find. Anna carried a larger bag, filled with small tools, knives, and containers for roots, nuts, and game. She also carried knowledge and inheritance from her mother passed down in stories and lessons about the land, about observing patterns, about listening to the prairie itself. The snow crunched under their boots as they left the cabin, the children falling obediently in a line behind Anna. The wind tore at their faces, biting through layers of clothing, and the cold made the children shiver despite her careful wrapping. Anna moved steadily, her eyes scanning the prairie for signs of edible plants, small game, and hidden resources that others might overlook. She knew that every plant, every seed, and every animal could provide vital nutrition, and she had trained herself to recognize them in even the harshest conditions. Their first stop was a stand of wild prairie turnips, a hardy root that could survive in frozen soil. Anna demonstrated to her children how to dig carefully, using a small wooden tool she had crafted for the purpose. She showed them how to loosen the soil without damaging the root, how to cut off the greens for later use, and how to preserve the roots for storage in the root cellar. The children watched intently, their small hands following her example, digging carefully in the cold, their faces pink from exertion and wind. Next, Anna led them to a cluster of wild berries that clung to thorny bushes despite the frost. They were small and shriveled, but still edible, and she showed her children how to collect them without tearing the branches or disturbing the plant too much. She explained how the bitterness of the berries indicated the need for cooking or fermentation before consumption, a lesson she had learned in her youth from her mother. The children filled small satchels, careful not to over-harvest, understanding that sustainability was essential. As they moved across the prairie, Anna set traps for small game. Rabbits and squirrels were abundant, but required skill to capture. She taught her older children to recognize tracks in the snow, to anticipate movement patterns, and to set snares in ways that increased the likelihood of a catch while minimizing suffering. She showed them how to inspect traps daily, how to prepare any caught animal for cooking, and how to use every part of it from the meat for protein to the bones for broth. The children listened carefully, absorbing the lessons that would serve them for the rest of their lives. The wind continued to whip across the prairie, and the cold deepened, but Anna pressed on. She had to teach her children not just to gather and hunt, but also to be resilient, to endure discomfort without complaint, and to see opportunity where others saw desolation. Every plant, every root, every animal was a potential meal, but only if approached with care and respect. She emphasized that survival was a combination of knowledge, observation, and patience. She pointed out patterns in the snow, how animals sought shelter, and how the land itself could indicate where food might be hidden. By midday, their satchels were filled with a modest bounty roots, nuts, a few berries, and the small game caught in traps. Anna led her children back to the cabin, carefully navigating through the snow and wind, teaching them to recognize landmarks, tracks, and subtle cues in the terrain that might otherwise go unnoticed. Once inside, she set to work processing the day's harvest. She boiled roots and vegetables into broths, prepared small portions of meat, and began the meticulous work of storing what could be preserved in the root cellar. She taught the children how to layer straw and sawdust, how to position items for maximum longevity, and how to keep track of rotations. Evenings were reserved for teaching and reflection. Around the hearth, Anna would explain the lessons of the day, reinforcing knowledge about the land, the plants, and the animals. She told stories of ancestors who had endured harsh winters, emphasizing ingenuity, patience, and observation as the keys to survival. She explained why some plants were edible only after cooking or fermentation, why some traps had failed and how to improve them, and why careful storage could mean the difference between life and death. The children listened with rapt attention, absorbing not just facts but a philosophy of resilience and resourcefulness. Anna also emphasized the value of every scrap of food. Potato peelings became broth, wilted greens were fermented or boiled, and even bones were used to extract nutrients. She showed her children that nothing in their environment was truly useless. With knowledge and skill, every resource could be transformed into sustenance. They learned to appreciate small victories: a root harvested intact, a berry preserved without spoilage, a successful snare, understanding that survival was built on cumulative effort and attention to detail. The winter deepened, bringing snow that covered the prairie in a uniform white blanket. Visibility was often limited, and the cold became more intense with each passing day. Yet Anna persisted, moving with her children through the frozen landscape, teaching, gathering, and ensuring that their modest stores were maintained. She adapted continuously, discovering new methods for insulating roots, protecting herbs, and storing small game. She experimented with layering, packing, and wrapping, observing the effects of temperature fluctuations and moisture. Her children were involved in every step, learning firsthand the principles of observation, adaptation, and foresight. Through it all, Anna maintained a balance of discipline and encouragement. She recognized the children's fatigue, their occasional frustration, and their fear of the harsh winter, and she provided reassurance without false promises. She emphasized their successes, praised their diligence, and instilled confidence that their efforts mattered. Even in the most punishing conditions, she created a sense of purpose, a shared mission that unified her children in their daily labor. By the end of the third week in December, the fruits of their labor became evident. The root cellar was well stocked and organized, the preserved vegetables remained firm and edible, and the children had gained confidence in their abilities. They could forage for roots and berries, set and inspect traps, and process small game with skill and care. Anna's lessons were not abstract, they were lived, tangible, and immediately applicable. Each child now understood the connection between preparation, observation, and survival. Anna reflected quietly on the progress. The harsh winter was far from over, but the family's resilience had strengthened. Their knowledge of the prairie, their ability to forage, hunt, and preserve food, and their growing skill in adapting to changing conditions created a system that could sustain them. She knew the coming months would bring new challenges: frostbite, illness, blizzards, but she also knew that she had equipped her children with the tools to endure. Her foresight, ingenuity, and teaching had transformed them from passive recipients of survival into active participants, capable of sustaining themselves and contributing to the household as well-being. As night fell, Anna stoked the fire one final time and served a simple meal: a small portion of boiled roots, a few strips of dried meat, and a handful of preserved berries. The children ate in silence, the warmth of the hearth contrasting sharply with the cold beyond the cabin walls. After the meal, she gathered them around and discussed the day's lessons, reinforcing techniques for foraging, trapping, and food preservation. They spoke of successes and failures alike, learning not only from her guidance but from their own observations and experiences. Finally, Anna tucked her children into their straw-filled beds, ensuring each was warm and secure. She checked the fire, rotated the stored vegetables in the root cellar, and made notes in her mind about adjustments for the next day. The winter night was deep and cold, but within the cabin, a sense of calm perseverance prevailed. Survival was not guaranteed, but with skill, knowledge, and determination, Anna Bjornsson and her children had built a system that could endure even the harshest of months. And as she finally allowed herself a brief rest, she knew that the lessons of the prairie, the root cellar, and the frozen fields were not just about food. They were about resilience, resourcefulness, and the unyielding bond between a mother and her children. The midwinter winds of Nebraska had grown bitter and relentless, cutting across the plains with a piercing, unyielding chill that seemed to seep through even the thickest layers of clothing. The prairie, once dotted with the stubborn remains of a summer, as harvest, lay buried under a sheet of frost and early snow. Anna Bjornsson rose before dawn as she always did, her body aching from days of continuous labor, but her mind sharp and determined. 12 children still slept in their straw-filled beds, their breaths rising in soft clouds, and she paused to watch them for a moment, feeling a mix of pride, exhaustion, and apprehension. The winter was far from over, and the months ahead promised more danger than any of them had yet faced. Scurvy, frostbite, influenza, and starvation loomed like invisible predators, stalking them from the cold prairie beyond the cabin walls. Yet Anna was undeterred. Her knowledge, her ingenuity, and the lessons she had instilled in her children had prepared them for this season, but now survival required constant vigilance and adaptability. The first task of the morning was tending the root cellar. Anna descended the trapdoor carefully, feeling the cold air press against her face as she inspected her preserved stores. Potatoes remained firm, their earthy scent mingling with the straw and sawdust that insulated them. Carrots retained their subtle sweetness. Turnips, cabbage, and beets had survived remarkably well considering the relentless cold above ground. Anna rotated items meticulously, separating any that showed even the slightest softness or discoloration, adding fresh straw and sawdust where necessary. She had learned from bitter experience that small oversights could result in rapid spoilage, and in a household of 12, every vegetable counted. With the root cellar inspected, she returned to the cabin and stoked the fire in the hearth. The children began to stir, rubbing sleep from their eyes and gathering close to the warmth. Anna moved quickly but deliberately, distributing small bowls of vegetable broth she had prepared from leftover scraps, ensuring each child received the nutrients they required. The older children helped serve the younger ones, a chore they had come to perform with care and responsibility. Every day, Anna reinforced lessons about rationing, hygiene, and observation, simple but essential tools for surviving a winter in which illness could strike at any moment. Outside, the prairie wind howled, whipping through the skeletal trees and bending the tall grasses low to the frozen ground. Anna had long ago learned to read the signs of approaching storms. A sudden drop in temperature, a shift in wind direction, or a peculiar pattern of clouds could indicate the arrival of a blizzard. Today, the sky carried a gray, oppressive hue, and she knew the storm would arrive before nightfall. She urged the children to finish their morning tasks quickly, gathering firewood, checking traps, and collecting any remaining wild roots or nuts before the wind intensified. Every moment spent outdoors was calculated, each movement deliberate to minimize exposure and maximize yield. Frostbite had become a constant concern. Anna knew that fingers, toes, noses, and ears were particularly vulnerable, and she had devised improvised protective methods. Layers of wool, cloth, and straw were wrapped carefully, tied with string and checked constantly for tightness and coverage. She taught her children to recognize early symptoms: numbness, tingling, discoloration, and to report them immediately. Small injuries were treated with care, a warm cloth, gentle rubbing to restore circulation, and herbal salves she had prepared from wild plants. She explained to the older children that ignoring the early signs could lead to permanent damage, and they took the warning seriously, having already witnessed the effects of frost on small animals and neglected extremities. Illness, too, was ever present. The combination of cold, fatigue, and limited nutrition made the family vulnerable to flu, cold, and gastrointestinal issues. Anna had prepared a stock of herbal remedies, teas made from wild herbs, poultices for aches and fevers, and fermented cabbage to prevent vitamin deficiencies that could worsen illness. She monitored each child as condition constantly, noting subtle changes in appetite, energy, and mood. One cough, one flushed cheek, could indicate the onset of a potentially dangerous illness, and Anna responded immediately with treatment and isolation if necessary. She understood that vigilance and rapid response were just as vital as food and warmth. Even small cuts or bruises could become life-threatening in the winter. Anna instructed her children on proper care for minor injuries, cleaning wounds carefully with boiled water, applying herbal salves, and bandaging tightly. She emphasized that cleanliness was critical, even in extreme conditions. Infection could be far deadlier than hunger itself. The children learned to assist one another to check for injuries and to help apply treatment, instilling a sense of teamwork that would prove essential in the days when Anna herself could not be everywhere at once. The harsh winter made every chore more difficult. Fetching water from the well was a dangerous task during deep freezes. Ice often formed on the surface, and the bucket had to be carefully broken through without allowing it to crack or spill. Anna had devised a pulley system and insulated coverings to reduce the risk of freezing and spillage, and the older children assisted her with the effort, learning the delicate balance of timing, temperature, and force required to draw water safely. She emphasized caution, knowing that a single slip could result in frostbite or hypothermia. Meals were a constant exercise in creativity and ingenuity. The root cellar provided staples, but Anna had to transform them into nourishing, calorie-dense dishes that could sustain 12 growing bodies. Broths were made from vegetable scraps and bones, boiled slowly to extract maximum nutrients. Herbs, collected and dried earlier in the season, were added to improve flavor and prevent deficiency. Fermented vegetables provided vitamins and probiotics, and every meal was carefully portioned to ensure that the children received both calories and essential nutrients. Anna rotated ingredients meticulously, always mindful of freshness and spoilage, and she taught the children to understand the principles behind her methods. The cabin itself became a school in resilience. Anna structured the day carefully, ensuring that each child had a task, a responsibility, and a purpose. Some collected firewood, ensuring the hearth could be stoked throughout the day and night. Others prepared vegetables, boiled broths, or checked traps outside. Younger children assisted with cleaning and small chores. Every action was a lesson in observation, discipline, and cooperation. Anna emphasized that survival required more than physical strength. It required intelligence, awareness, and the ability to anticipate problems before they arose. Blizzards tested these lessons relentlessly. The wind could trap the family indoors for days, and snow often drifted high enough to block access to the well or the animal pens. During such storms, Anna relied heavily on her preparation. She had stockpiled firewood strategically around the cabin, stored extra bedding for warmth, and maintained enough preserved food to last through periods of isolation. She taught the children to remain calm during these storms, to conserve energy, and to focus on essential tasks. Panic, she explained, was as dangerous as the storm itself. The psychological strain of winter was as significant as the physical challenges. Isolation, cold, and the constant threat of scarcity weighed heavily, particularly on the younger children. Anna addressed this by incorporating small routines and ritual storytelling by the hearth, songs passed down from her mother, and moments of quiet reflection. These routines reinforced a sense of stability and predictability, helping her children maintain hope and resilience even in the face of relentless hardship. Anna also had to contend with the unpredictability of her environment. Snow could collapse weak branches onto the cabin, animals could stray or be lost, and unexpected illnesses could arise. Her strategy was constant adaptation. She observed, experimented, and adjusted, learning from each day's challenges. When frost damaged a batch of stored roots, she altered the layering technique. When a blizzard threatened to isolate them from the well, she devised insulated pathways and backup supplies. Her children watched these adaptations closely, learning not just the mechanics of survival, but the mindset necessary to endure adversity, vigilance, creativity, and flexibility. By midwinter, the family had settled into a rhythm. Each day was a cycle of observation, labor, and careful management of resources. Anna's children had grown stronger, more skilled, and more confident in their abilities. They could identify signs of frostbite and illness, gather and process roots and herbs, prepare broths, and maintain the fire in the cabin. Each child was an essential part of the household as survival, and Anna reinforced the principle that cooperation and shared responsibility were vital to enduring the harsh winter. Yet challenges continued. Illnesses emerged despite her careful preparation, often triggered by sudden temperature shifts or exhaustion. Anna responded with calm efficiency, isolating affected children, administering herbal remedies, and adjusting rations to ensure the sick received adequate nutrition. She monitored each child individually, noting subtle changes in complexion, appetite, and behavior, knowing that early intervention could prevent serious complications. Her constant vigilance was exhausting, but it was the difference between life and death. Frostbite remained a constant threat during outdoor work. Anna instructed her older children on warming techniques, the careful removal of damp clothing, and the use of heated sandbags or cloth wraps to restore circulation. She demonstrated how to rub fingers and toes gently, avoiding aggressive manipulation that could cause tissue damage. The younger children stayed close to the cabin, observing and learning these methods through careful guidance. Over time, the family developed a system of checks, ensuring that no one ventured outside without proper protection and that injuries were addressed immediately. Even with careful planning, scarcity imposed difficult choices. Anna rationed meat and preserved vegetables with precision, always considering caloric needs, nutritional content, and the potential duration of the winter. She taught her children to weigh options, make decisions based on observation and experience, and understand the importance of patience. Immediate gratification was dangerous. Survival required delayed consumption and careful planning. Every bite was a calculated decision, and her children came to understand the responsibility inherent in each choice. Anna's resourcefulness extended to the smallest details. Melted snow provided water, but only after being carefully boiled to prevent illness. Small scraps of fat from butchered animals were preserved for cooking and warmth. Herbs were dried and stored, used strategically to prevent nutritional deficiencies. Even the cold itself was harnessed. Frozen food could be stored outside temporarily during blizzards, and ice blocks were used to regulate temperature in storage containers. Anna taught her children that the harshness of the environment could be transformed into a tool when approached with understanding and ingenuity. By the end of January, the family had weathered the worst of the early winter. The root cellar remained well stocked and organized, the preserved food stable and nutritious. The children had gained confidence in their skills, understanding the principles of survival and adaptation. Anna had demonstrated day after day that vigilance, creativity, and knowledge were as vital as food and fire. She had transformed the cabin into a safe haven, a place where life could endure against the unrelenting challenges of winter. As night fell, Anna stoked the fire, preparing a simple meal of broth, preserved vegetables, and small portions of meat. The children ate quietly, their faces illuminated by the warm glow of the hearth, and she reviewed the day's lessons with them, reinforcing observation, careful work, and attention to detail. They discussed what had gone well, what could be improved, and how they would approach the next day. In these moments, the cabin was a school, a home, and a fortress, and Anna's teachings ensured that every child understood their role in the family as survival. Finally, Anna tucked her children into their beds, checking each one for warmth, frostbite, and illness. She rotated the firewood and inspected the root cellar one last time, noting areas that required attention the following morning. The night was deep, the wind harsh, but inside, a sense of quiet resilience prevailed. The family had survived blizzards, illness, frostbite, and scarcity because of Anna's foresight, ingenuity, and unwavering dedication. Her children were stronger, wiser, and more capable than they had been weeks ago, and the lessons they had learned would carry them through the remainder of winter and beyond. Anna allowed herself a moment of reflection. The harsh winter remained an enemy, but she had built a system of survival, a network of knowledge, skills, and careful planning that could endure even the most punishing conditions. Her efforts had not only preserved life, but instilled resilience, discipline, and confidence in her children. Survival was no longer a passive hope. It was an active practice, a result of observation, ingenuity, and the unyielding determination of a mother to protect her family at any cost. In that knowledge, she found a quiet triumph and the assurance that, no matter what challenges lay ahead, she and her children would endure. February arrived with a bitter insistence, painting the prairie white with snow that seemed to stretch endlessly into the horizon. The wind carried a sharp chill, cutting across the plains and rattling the log walls of Anna Bjornson's cabin. Inside, the hearth glowed with a steady, comforting warmth, a small but defiant barrier against the relentless cold outside. Anna rose before dawn, her movements precise and purposeful, honed from months of labor, observation, and adaptation. 12 children stirred beneath layers of straw and wool, their breaths rising in soft clouds that fogged the air. She paused to watch them, their small faces serene in sleep, each one a testament to resilience, discipline, and survival. Winter had been unyielding, yet they were alive, stronger than they had been when the first frost fell, and it was a triumph that she allowed herself only a fleeting moment to savor. The first task of the morning was, as always, inspection of the root cellar. The hatch creaked as she opened it, releasing a cold gust that carried the faint, earthy scent of stored vegetables. Potatoes were firm and unblemished, carrots retained their subtle sweetness, and the cabbages had survived remarkably well despite the relentless freeze above. Anna moved meticulously among the rows of straw and sawdust, adjusting layers, separating roots that showed the slightest softness, and rotating items to ensure even preservation. Each movement was deliberate, every action grounded in months of experience and experimentation. She had learned that survival depended not merely on stockpiling food, but on careful management, observation, and timely intervention. Once satisfied with the cellar, Anna returned to the cabin to stoke the fire, ensuring a steady, comforting warmth for her children as they awoke. One by one, they emerged from their beds, shivering slightly despite the layers of clothing and straw, and Anna moved among them, distributing small bowls of broth she had prepared from vegetable scraps and preserved meat. The older children assisted the younger ones, a practice she had instilled from the earliest days of winter. These small acts of care reinforced responsibility, cooperation, and discipline, crucial qualities for survival in a landscape that offered neither mercy nor respite. Outside, the prairie stretched endlessly, a stark, frozen expanse that demanded vigilance and ingenuity. The children were now adept at navigating this terrain, trained in foraging, hunting, and the observation of subtle environmental cues. Anna led them carefully, showing where to find the last hardy roots beneath frozen soil, how to identify edible wild herbs, and how to gather nuts and berries that had survived the cold. Each lesson was reinforced with careful explanation, the nutritional value, the preservation method, and the role each food played in sustaining the family. Her children moved with confidence now, hands skilled, eyes observant, understanding that survival was not a matter of luck but of knowledge and deliberate action. Traps for small game had become increasingly efficient. Anna taught her children how to adjust snares to increase the likelihood of capturing rabbits or squirrels, how to recognize tracks in the snow, and how to anticipate animal movements even under the cover of drifting snow. They checked traps methodically, understanding that every successful catch provided protein essential for growth and energy, while failure was an opportunity to observe, learn, and adapt. The children, as competence grew daily, what had begun as tentative attempts in November had transformed into a skill set that rivaled even the most experienced frontiersmen in the area. Meanwhile, the neighbors who had watched Anna's peculiar methods with skepticism and sometimes derision began to notice a difference. The harsh winter had forced many families to consume their stores rapidly, leaving them reliant on increasingly scarce resources. Their root cellars were depleted, meat was gone or spoiled, and frostbite and illness were taking their toll. Anna's family, however, remained well-nourished, alert, and remarkably healthy. Rumors spread across the prairie about the Norwegian mother who had 12 children thriving in a season that was otherwise claiming lives. Some whispered in awe, others with suspicion, but all were drawn by the evidence of her success. Anna herself was largely indifferent to the whispers. Her focus remained on survival and education. Yet she could not ignore the subtle changes in perception around her homestead. A neighbor had left a bundle of firewood at her gate one morning, silent but respectful, a gesture acknowledging the skill, effort, and ingenuity that had allowed her family to endure. Another stopped briefly to inquire about her preservation methods, curious despite prior skepticism. Anna received these overtures with calm patience, sharing knowledge sparingly but thoughtfully, emphasizing principles of observation, careful management, and ingenuity rather than mere techniques. She wanted to teach not just methods but the mindset necessary to endure, to think creatively, and to act deliberately in the face of adversity. Inside the cabin, life had grown rhythmically efficient. Each child knew their responsibilities intimately. The youngest assisted in small ways, helping carry scraps or prepare herbs. The middle children managed portions of firewood, water, and preservation tasks. The oldest took on complex tasks such as supervising traps, assisting with cooking, and teaching younger siblings skills they had already mastered. Anna moved among them with quiet authority, observing, correcting, and praising where appropriate. This structure, developed through months of trial, error, and careful observation, created a resilient household capable of withstanding the relentless challenges of the winter. Meals continued to be a balance of careful rationing, creativity, and nutrition. Broths from vegetable scraps and preserved meat were supplemented with wild herbs, roots, and nuts, while fermented cabbage provided essential vitamins to prevent deficiencies such as scurvy. Anna rotated ingredients methodically, ensuring freshness, and constantly adjusted portions based on energy expenditure, weather conditions, and the needs of growing bodies. The children were learning to weigh these decisions themselves, understanding the delicate balance between immediate satisfaction and long-term survival. Each bite, each meal, reinforced lessons in observation, resource management, and foresight. The psychological aspect of survival remained critical. Isolation, relentless cold, and constant labor weighed heavily on the children's spirits. Anna addressed this with daily routines, storytelling, and songs, creating moments of stability, comfort, and reflection. She emphasized shared responsibility, celebrating small successes, and reinforcing the connection between effort and outcome. These routines provided structure and emotional resilience, teaching the children to endure hardship with patience and confidence. By mid-February, they were not only physically capable but emotionally resilient, capable of facing adversity with calm, deliberate action. Outside the cabin, blizzards continued to challenge even the most prepared families. Snow could block pathways, limit visibility, and isolate the homestead entirely. Anna had developed methods to mitigate these challenges, insulated pathways for accessing the well, strategically placed firewood, and temporary storage of food outside for immediate use during brief excursions. She taught her children to observe wind patterns, snow accumulation, and temperature shifts, allowing them to anticipate hazards before they became critical. These lessons transformed the children into proactive problem solvers, capable of adapting to a dynamic and often hostile environment. Anna also emphasized the importance of hygiene and illness prevention. She monitored each child closely, noting changes in appetite, energy, and mood that could indicate the onset of illness. Herbal remedies, poultices, and teas were administered promptly, while isolation and careful care prevented the spread of infection. Minor injuries, frostbite, or illness were treated immediately, ensuring that small problems did not escalate into life-threatening conditions. The children learned to recognize symptoms, assist in care, and understand the delicate balance required to maintain health in extreme conditions. Throughout this period, the neighbors continued to observe Anna's methods with growing curiosity and respect. The contrast was stark. Where families had exhausted their stores, succumbed to illness, or suffered frostbite, Anna's household remained stable, nourished, and resilient. Some neighbors approached with questions, seeking guidance or advice, and Anna shared her knowledge with careful precision. She emphasized not just techniques, but the principles underlying them: observation, preparation, creativity, and adaptation. Survival, she taught, was a mindset as much as a series of actions. By late February, the full effectiveness of Anna's preparations became undeniable. The root cellar remained well-stocked, the preserved vegetables stable, and the family healthy and capable. The children had mastered skills in foraging, hunting, preservation, and resource management, demonstrating remarkable competence for their ages. They could navigate the frozen prairie, identify edible plants, set and check traps, and process game with skill and efficiency. Even in the harshest conditions, the household functioned smoothly, each member contributing to the family's survival. Anna reflected on the months past. The winter had tested every aspect of their endurance, physical strength, knowledge, ingenuity, and emotional resilience. Yet her preparation, teaching, and constant vigilance had carried them through. Her children were no longer merely surviving. They were thriving within the limitations imposed by their environment. They had learned lessons that would serve them for the rest of their lives: how to observe carefully, adapt creatively, ration wisely, and act decisively in the face of adversity. As night fell over the prairie, Anna prepared a final meal of the day, a hearty broth enriched with roots, preserved meat, and wild herbs. The children ate in silence, savoring the warmth of the hearth and the nourishment of their labor. Anna gathered them afterward, reinforcing the lessons of the day, reflecting on successes and failures, and preparing for the days ahead. She reminded them that winter was not yet over, that vigilance must continue, and that every action mattered in the delicate balance between survival and scarcity. Finally, she tucked each child into their straw-filled bed, ensuring warmth, comfort, and safety. She rotated the firewood, checked the root cellar one last time, and allowed herself a moment of reflection. The harsh winter raged outside, yet within the cabin life thrived. Anna's foresight, ingenuity, and teaching had not only preserved life, but transformed her children into capable, resilient individuals. Neighbors. Whispers had shifted from skepticism to awe. The evidence of her success was undeniable. Yet for Anna, the true triumph was the knowledge that she had equipped her family with the skills, discipline, and confidence to endure any winter to come. In the quiet of the night, with the wind howling outside and the hearth burning steadily, Anna Bjornsson allowed herself a rare sense of satisfaction. 12 children lay fed, warm, and alert, prepared to meet challenges with resilience and skill. The prairie was harsh and unyielding, but the household within her cabin had become a fortress of knowledge, ingenuity, and determination. Survival was no longer a passive hope. It was an active, deliberate practice, a daily demonstration of skill, observation, and unwavering resolve. And in that knowledge, Anna found her quiet triumph, a family prepared, capable, and enduring, the embodiment of human ingenuity and maternal determination in the face of relentless adversity. The last days of February brought a brittle clarity to the Nebraska prairie, the air sharp with cold yet carrying the hint of spring in the faint warmth of midday sun. Anna Bjornsson rose before dawn, as she had every day through months of relentless winter, and stood for a moment at the cabin window, gazing out across the frozen expanse. The snow glimmered in pale light, stretching to the horizon where the skeletal outlines of the trees were etched against the gray sky. 12 children lay sleeping in their straw-filled beds, their breaths rising in gentle clouds that dissipated quickly in the frigid air. Anna allowed herself a brief moment of reflection, marveling at how far they had come. She had survived the harshest stretch of winter with 12 children under her care, and now the lessons of endurance, observation, and ingenuity were solidifying into habit, preparing them not just to survive, but to thrive. The morning began as it always had, with careful inspection of the root cellar. Anna descended the trapdoor, noting the subtle differences in the stored vegetables. Potatoes remained firm, carrots retained their sweetness, and cabbages and turnips had survived the months with only minimal signs of deterioration. Anna rotated the produce, adjusting straw layers to maintain optimal insulation and airflow, carefully separating anything that showed even the slightest sign of decay. Months of observation had taught her to anticipate problems before they became serious, and the root cellar had become a living experiment in preservation. each day a chance to refine methods and improve results. After tending to the root cellar, Anna moved to the hearth to stoke the fire, ensuring that warmth filled the cabin before the children rose. One by one, they emerged from their beds, rubbing sleep from their eyes and instinctively gravitating toward the fire. Anna distributed bowls of broth, carefully prepared from preserved vegetables, and the small game they had caught, ensuring that each child received enough nourishment for the work ahead. The older children helped serve the younger ones, a practice that reinforced both responsibility and the understanding that survival was a collective effort. Each child knew that their contributions mattered, that the actions of one person could affect the well-being of the entire household. Once the morning meal was complete, Anna gathered her children for the day's work. The weather was mercifully calm, the wind lighter than in previous weeks, and the pale sun offered a promise of endurance rather than adversity. Anna led the children across the snow-covered prairie to gather what remaining wild food they could find. Roots poked through frozen soil, hardy herbs clung to stubborn patches of earth, and a scattering of berries remained resilient on thorny bushes. Anna demonstrated how to identify edible plants in a landscape made deceptive by frost, how to collect roots without damaging the surrounding soil, and how to harvest herbs in a way that allowed them to regrow for future use. Her children followed closely, their small hands and eyes trained through months of practice, recognizing patterns and subtle signs that would have gone unnoticed by untrained eyes. Children. Skills had grown exponentially since the early days of winter. They could now navigate the prairie independently, identify safe and nutritious plants, and differentiate between edible roots and dangerous substitutes. They checked traps with precision, resetting snares for rabbits or squirrels, and carefully preparing any captured game for cooking. Anna emphasized the importance of understanding the behavior of animals, the tracks left in snow, and the subtle shifts in wind and temperature that could affect movement. Her children moved confidently, knowing that their observations, patience, and deliberate actions were essential to sustaining their family. Back at the cabin, Anna oversaw the preparation of meals and the management of supplies. Broths were enriched with the small harvest, dried meats were portioned carefully, and fermented vegetables provided essential vitamins to prevent deficiencies. She taught her children to store and organize their supplies with attention to detail, demonstrating techniques to prevent spoilage, monitor temperature, and maintain balance between consumption and preservation. Her meticulous methods ensured that even as winter continued, the family's nutritional needs were met consistently. Beyond the immediate concerns of survival, Anna focused on long-term strategies. She taught her children to anticipate seasonal changes, to recognize the patterns of frost and thaw, and to prepare for the gradual transition into spring. Tools were maintained, paths cleared, and new traps prepared for the emerging wildlife. She emphasized observation of the environment, understanding that survival depended not only on immediate labor but on foresight and planning. The children learned to monitor snowpack, track the movements of animals, and assess the readiness of the soil for planting, knowledge that would prove essential in the months ahead. Illness and frostbite, constant threats throughout the winter, were now more manageable due to the lessons Anna had instilled. Children were vigilant in observing one another, identifying early signs of cold-related injury or infection, and applying remedies promptly. Herbal teas, poultices, and careful clothing management prevented minor conditions from becoming critical. Anna reinforced the importance of hygiene, understanding that maintaining health in the cold months was as much about prevention as treatment. Each child knew how to assist in care, preparing them for moments when Anna might be occupied elsewhere. As the day progressed, Anna led her children in tasks designed to strengthen both their skills and their resilience. Some gathered firewood from sheltered groves, learning to identify trees with the strongest branches for fuel. Others checked traps, processed harvested roots, or prepared portions for storage. Still others focused on fortifying the cabin, insulating gaps, repairing doors, and maintaining the hearth. Each task was an opportunity to teach principles of observation, careful work, and foresight. Anna reinforced the understanding that survival was cumulative. Each careful action, each attentive observation, contributed to the family's endurance. Meanwhile, the neighbors continued to notice the Bjornsson family as remarkable condition. Where other households were depleting stores, suffering illness, or struggling to maintain warmth, Anna's household remained alert, nourished, and resilient. Neighbors approached with curiosity and respect, asking questions about preservation, rationing, and the maintenance of health. Anna shared her knowledge judiciously, emphasizing principles rather than merely techniques. She sought to instill understanding rather than imitation, teaching that the mindset, attentiveness, and adaptability were as crucial as the methods themselves. Inside the cabin, evenings were devoted to reflection, storytelling, and reinforcement of survival skills. Anna gathered her children around the hearth, discussing the day, as successes, failures, and lessons. They spoke of observed animal tracks, the effectiveness of traps, and the quality of stored food. Anna explained adjustments for the following days, reinforcing the importance of careful observation, patience, and creativity. She encouraged her children to ask questions, to reason through challenges, and to anticipate consequences, cultivating critical thinking as an essential survival skill. The psychological aspects of endurance were also central to Anna's approach. Months of isolation, relentless cold, and continuous labor had tested both children and mother. She maintained routines that provided structure, stability, and a sense of progress. Songs, stories of ancestors, and moments of reflection offered emotional sustenance, reinforcing resilience and hope. The children learned to find satisfaction in small achievements, to celebrate successful harvests or effective trap resets, and to recognize the value of cooperative effort. These lessons ensured that emotional fortitude complemented physical skill, creating a holistic approach to survival. By early March, the family situation had stabilized. Supplies remained sufficient. The children skills were formidable, and illness or injury was minimal due to careful management. Anna's foresight had extended beyond the immediate survival of the winter. She had prepared her children to endure and adapt to future challenges. The knowledge they had acquired identifying edible plants, managing preservation, anticipating environmental conditions, and maintaining health would serve them for the rest of their lives. The children were no longer passive dependents. They had become active participants in their own survival. Anna also turned attention to preparing for spring. Seeds stored from the previous autumn were inspected, sorted, and readied for planting. She taught the children the importance of soil assessment, crop rotation, and planting schedules. Even in the coldest months, they experimented with methods to protect seedlings and preserve the integrity of their stores. Anna emphasized that survival was cyclical. Preparation during winter ensured abundance during spring and summer, and careful observation, attention to detail, and consistent labor were critical to this ongoing process. The neighbors continued to take notice. Families who had doubted Anna's methods saw the stark contrast in outcomes. The Bjornson children were healthy, alert, and capable, their energy and resilience apparent to all who visited or passed by. Some sought guidance, asking questions about preservation, rationing, and care for children during the long winter months. Anna shared advice selectively, emphasizing principles and observation rather than giving away the full intricacies of her methods, ensuring that her family retained both a competitive advantage and the lessons of self-reliance. Inside the cabin, Anna reinforced the broader lessons of the winter: adaptability, observation, ingenuity, and resilience. She reflected on how far they had come from early despair over failed crops and harsh conditions to a state of mastery over their environment. Each child had grown in skill, knowledge, and confidence, capable of sustaining themselves and contributing meaningfully to the household. Anna's teachings had transcended the immediate survival of the winter. They had instilled a philosophy of life, grounded in careful observation, deliberate action, and respect for the resources of the land. Even as the days lengthened and the promise of spring emerged on the horizon, Anna remained vigilant. There were still risks, late blizzards, frozen soil, unpredictable storms, but her family was prepared. Supplies were well organized, skills honed, and routines firmly established. Each child had internalized the principles of survival: attentive observation, careful planning, adaptation to changing conditions, and cooperation with others. These lessons would endure beyond the winter, ensuring long-term resilience and self-sufficiency. In the evenings, Anna continued to gather the children around the hearth. They reflected on lessons learned, celebrated achievements, and discussed strategies for the coming months. Anna emphasized that survival was not simply about enduring the present moment, but preparing for the future. They practiced new preservation techniques, experimented with combinations of stored and foraged food, and refined strategies for hunting and trapping. Each activity reinforced both skill and confidence, building a foundation of competence that would serve them for years to come. Finally, as the sun set over the prairie, Anna ensured each child was warm, fed, and comfortable. She rotated firewood, checked the root cellar, and reflected on the months of struggle that had brought them to this point. The harsh winter had tested their endurance, knowledge, and resilience, yet the Bjornson family had emerged stronger, healthier, and more capable. Anna's ingenuity, careful observation, and teaching had transformed potential desperation into sustained survival. Her children had not only learned to endure, they had learned to master their environment, to anticipate challenges, and to act with confidence and foresight. As night fell and the wind howled against the cabin walls, Anna allowed herself a rare sense of satisfaction. 12 children lay safe, nourished, and capable of meeting challenges with skill and resolve. The harsh Nebraska winter, relentless and unforgiving, had been endured and overcome through careful planning, observation, and maternal ingenuity. The lessons imparted would carry beyond the frozen months, ensuring that her family, resilience, resourcefulness, and determination would endure through seasons to come. And in that knowledge, Anna Bjornson found quiet triumph, the assurance that her children were equipped not merely to survive, but to thrive in the harsh realities of frontier life.